Have you ever wondered what life in a nursing home is truly like? Is it a haven of safety and comfort? Or is there something more lurking behind those walls? For many older adults, the decision to move into a nursing home isn't just a change of address, it's a trade-off between the care they receive and the freedom they lose. The loneliness, the rigid routines, and the quiet loss of independence can weigh heavily on anyone. But is this the only path to take? Are there alternatives that allow you to age gracefully while still holding on to your independence and sense of purpose? Today, we bring you 7 inspiring stories of older individuals who have defied expectations. They chose a different path, one that empowered them to retain control over their lives, stay true to their passions, and embrace aging on their own terms. These stories remind us that growing older doesn't have to mean giving up on what matters most. So, as you read these stories, take a moment to reflect. How would you want to live when the years catch up with you? Would you be willing to let go of your independence for safety? Or could you find a way to maintain both freedom and security without compromise? If you're curious to learn more about how to live purposefully and age gracefully, join us for more stories that will inspire you. Subscribe to our channel to continue the journey of living life on your terms. Story 1. The Resilient Man. Mr. Thomas. At 87 years old, Mr. Thomas still fiercely maintains his independence. Throughout his life, he believed, as long as I'm breathing, I'm the one in charge of my life. Each morning, he begins his day with a strong black coffee, no sugar, no cream, just like his life. Simple, unadorned, and bold. He would joke with his friends, telling them that life's best moments were found in these quiet, routine mornings. Afterward, he'd take a stroll around the neighborhood, often stopping by the local bakery to catch up with the familiar faces of old friends. Then, he'd return to his favorite armchair, a worn but cherished seat, to immerse himself in a historical novel, savoring every page in peace. However, over time, the aches and pains of aging began to slow his stride. What was once a brisk walk around the block now became a laborious task. His mobility worsened, and soon, it became more difficult to do the things he once took for granted. His children, concerned about his well-being, suggested that he consider moving into an assisted living facility where he could receive constant care. Mr. Thomas was appalled by the suggestion. He scoffed and said, "I've taken care of myself all these years. Why would I stop now?" To him, moving into a nursing home felt like surrendering his freedom, something he had held sacred throughout his entire life. His small garden, his peaceful mornings, and, perhaps most importantly, his ability to eat a pastry whenever he pleased, were things he simply wasn't willing to give up. But rather than bow to the pressure and give up his home for a sterile environment, Mr. Thomas found a way to adapt. He hired a part-time assistant to help with household chores, installed safety rails in the bathroom, and set up an emergency alert system in case of a fall. Every week, his daughter would visit to go grocery shopping and prepare meals together, ensuring he had everything he needed while still maintaining his autonomy. These simple but effective adjustments allowed Mr. Thomas to continue living in the house he loved, without sacrificing his independence. Mr. Thomas's story serves as a powerful reminder that aging doesn't have to mean losing control over your life. Have you ever thought about how you would want to live as you grow older? Would you prefer a life where you continue to make your own choices, or one where others dictate your every move in a nursing home? Story 2. Mrs. Eleanor and the Endless Dance. At 78, Mrs. Eleanor never subscribed to the idea that aging meant slowing down. One afternoon, she noticed her grandchildren glued to their phones, laughing at something on TikTok. Curious, she asked, "What's so funny? Show me." Her 18-year-old granddaughter, Emma, turned around and explained, "Grandma, this is TikTok. People make funny videos, dance, and even do live streams to chat with others." Mrs. Eleanor raised an eyebrow in surprise and asked, "Do older people do this too?" Emma chuckled and replied, "No one's stopping you, Grandma, but I've never seen anyone like you do it before." And with that, Mrs. Eleanor's curiosity was piqued. She thought, why not give it a try? Her first video was a simple one, just her dancing in the kitchen while baking cookies. What happened next astonished everyone. Strangers began leaving comments like, "You're so adorable. I wish my grandma was as cool as you." Seeing the joy her video brought, Mrs. Eleanor thought, if people like this, why not do more? From that point on, she decided to try something new every week. One day, she took on a challenge and danced the rye dance. Another day she live-streamed herself making her secret family soup recipe. But what she enjoyed most was getting her family involved. Her son helped her film the cooking videos. Her granddaughter joined in for quick Q&A challenges. And even her elderly neighbor agreed to do a live stream with her about taking care of houseplants. Of course, not everyone was on board. Some of the neighbors shook their heads, saying, "You're too old for this. Just rest and stop acting like a teenager." But she just laughed and replied, "Why not? I've never done this before. And now's the perfect time to try." Mrs. Eleanor's story serves as a powerful reminder that age should never be a barrier to trying new things. Have you ever pushed yourself to do something completely new? Like making a TikTok video, going live, or even dancing just for fun? Or would you rather sit back and let time quietly pass by? Story 3. Mr. Arthur and his cross-country journey. At 88, Mr. Arthur had no intention of spending his remaining years sitting in an old armchair by the window. He had always believed the world was vast and full of adventures. And there was still time to explore it. One afternoon, while visiting his grandson, he noticed a large map of the United States pinned to the wall. For a fleeting moment, a thought crossed his mind: how far have I really traveled in my life? As he mentally retraced the places he'd been, he realized that he'd never ventured beyond the borders of his own state. Why not start now? At first, his family assumed it was just another one of his passing whims. But they were taken aback when they saw him pull out a notebook and begin planning. Mr. Arthur decided to embark on a cross-country road trip in his old pickup truck, not by plane or a luxury cruise ship, but in the very truck that had been by his side for years. Now, this trusty vehicle would become his home on wheels for the adventure he had dreamed of. His journey began with a drive from New York to Chicago, where he savored the famous deep dish pizza and soaked in a lively jazz performance. In Texas, he tried horseback riding for the first time, a thrilling experience that nearly ended with him being thrown off the horse. When he reached California, he parked by the beach, lowered the window, and let the salty breeze fill his lungs. It felt as though he was seeing the ocean for the first time. Of course, the trip wasn't without its challenges. Long hours behind the wheel made his back ache, and there were times when he got lost and had to ask for directions. But to Mr. Arthur, these were just part of the adventure. Each bump along the road and every detour was an opportunity to learn and experience something new. Mr. Arthur's journey serves as a powerful reminder that aging doesn't mean stopping the adventure. As long as you hold on to curiosity, the world remains full of wonders to explore. Have you ever thought about how you want to live as you get older? Will you continue seeking new experiences, or let age hold you back in the comfort of what you know? Story 4. Grandma gets the hang of technology. Eleanor's journey with her smartphone. At 80, Grandma Eleanor had always prided herself on living without the constant pull of technology. "Back in my day, we didn't have smartphones, and we did just fine," she would often say. Text messages, video calls, and social media were all things for younger folks, while older people, in her mind, should focus on reading the newspaper, tending to the garden, and enjoying a peaceful life. But one day, everything changed. Her granddaughter, Emily, had moved to a different city for work, and though they once chatted every day, their conversations were now reduced to brief phone calls. One day, Emily suggested, "Grandma, why don't you learn how to do a video call so we can see each other?" At first, Grandma Eleanor immediately shook her head. "I don't know how to use those things. What if I press the wrong button?" But when she saw the hope in Emily's eyes, she decided to give it a try. With Emily's patient guidance, and after a few failed attempts, Grandma Eleanor finally succeeded in making her first video call. When she saw her granddaughter's face appear on the screen, she chuckled and said, "Now I see why the younger ones are always glued to their phones." From that moment on, Eleanor was no longer afraid of technology. She learned how to send text messages to family members, search for recipes online, and even recorded a few light exercise videos for seniors. She didn't need to become a tech expert, just enough to stay connected with the ones she loved. Of course, there were still moments when she accidentally hit the wrong button, sent blank messages, or accidentally started a video call at the most unexpected times. But each time, she'd laugh and say, "I might be old, but I'm still learning. You all have to be patient with me." Grandma Eleanor's story reminds us that technology isn't a barrier, it's a doorway to new connections and experiences. Have you ever tried learning something you thought was beyond your reach? Will you give it a go? Or let age stop you from enjoying the modern conveniences of today's world? Story 5. Mr. Lewis and the Garden of Memories. At 79, Mr. Lewis had come to understand one vital truth: there are things you can lose and later reclaim. But passion is not one of them. For him, that passion was his beloved garden. Every morning, without fail, he would step outside with a steaming cup of coffee in hand, gaze upon the blooming flowers, and watch the leaves stretch toward the sunlight. There was no rush. Each tree, each petal, held a memory, quietly bearing witness to the years he had spent nurturing them. His garden wasn't just a collection of plants, it was a living chronicle of his life. But as the years went on, time didn't only help his plants grow, it also slowed him down. His back ached more with every movement, and his knees creaked in protest as he walked. Some mornings, after watering the plants, he would have to pause, leaning against the railing, sighing at the betrayal of aging. "Dad, maybe it's time to take it easy," his son suggested one day. "We could hire someone to tend the garden, or just let it grow wild." But how could he walk away from the garden he had lovingly tended for decades? If his legs no longer supported him, he would sit and care for the plants from a chair. If his hands were weaker, he would choose plants that were easier to manage. He could no longer carry the heavy pots, but he could still run his fingers over the delicate petals, still breathe in the fresh, earthy scent of the soil. So, he adapted. He arranged smaller pots neatly on shelves, hung fragile flowers along the balcony so the gentle breeze could make them dance. He no longer needed to bend down, just reaching up was enough to feel the coolness of the leaves between his fingers. Sitting by the small pots, sipping his morning coffee, watching the sunlight filter through the green canopy, he realized that gardening wasn't about the size of the space or the number of plants. It was about the joy of nurturing life. His garden was smaller now, but the joy it brought him remained unchanged. For Mr. Lewis, gardening wasn't just about planting flowers, it was about sowing seeds of joy and hope for the days ahead. Have you ever thought about how you want to live as you age? Will you continue to cherish the small joys in life? Or will you let time take away the things that once brought you happiness? Story 6. Mrs. Catherine and the decision to stay at home. At 86, Mrs. Catherine had come to realize that her body wasn't as it once was. The stairs seemed steeper, household chores felt more taxing, and sometimes, the silence of her spacious home echoed louder than ever before. Her children, concerned for her well-being, suggested that she move into an assisted living facility where she would have constant care. "You'll have friends, nurses around the clock, and you won't have to worry about anything," they reassured her. But Mrs. Catherine simply smiled and shook her head. "I don't want a place where my schedule is already decided for me. Where someone tells me when to eat and when to sleep. I want to be where it still feels like home." This house wasn't just a roof over her head. It was a collection of memories, a lifetime of moments. It was the place where she and her late husband had spent countless hours painting the living room walls. Where her children had once run around the hallways in laughter. Where she had spent years building a life full of love and warmth. How could she leave all of that behind just because she was aging? Of course, living alone wasn't always easy. But instead of letting her age define the way she lived, Mrs. Catherine chose to adapt. She asked her son to install handrails on the stairs, put down non-slip rugs around the house, and hired a part-time housekeeper to help with the heavier chores. She also joined a local senior community group where she could share stories, stay mentally sharp, and build meaningful connections with others. For Mrs. Catherine, Aging didn't mean abandoning the things she loved. It simply meant finding ways to preserve them for as long as possible. She didn't want to let go of the house she had built, the memories it held, or the independence she cherished. In doing so, she was showing that the essence of life isn't about giving in to the challenges of aging but rather navigating them on your own terms. Holding on to what matters most. Have you ever thought about how you want to live as you grow older? Will you hold on to the control of your life? Or will you let others dictate the course of your days? Story 7. Mr. Henry and the Journey Back to Memories. At the age of 85, Mr. Henry found that the long road trips he once loved were no longer within reach. He had always been a passionate traveler, often taking leisurely drives through small towns with his wife, exploring hidden alleys and sitting by tranquil rivers, absorbing the peaceful flow of life. But as his legs grew weaker and his energy waned, those lengthy adventures seemed like a distant memory, one he could no longer participate in. One afternoon, as he was cleaning his bookshelf, he stumbled upon an old box tucked away in the corner. It was filled with photographs from the many travels he and his wife had shared. The images captured moments of joy, from wandering the streets of Barcelona to watching sunsets over the Grand Canyon. As the memories flooded his mind, they didn't bring feelings of sadness or regret. Instead, they sparked something deeper, a thought that stayed with him. If I can't travel far anymore, why not bring the travel to me? And with that, Mr. Henry set off on a new kind of journey, one that unfolded within the four walls of his home. He asked his grandchildren to help him find videos of the places he'd been, from the winding streets of Prague to the snow-capped peaks of the Swiss Alps. Every morning, he would embark on his travels, sipping a cup of coffee as he watched scenes of the places he once visited, his memories becoming a window to the world. But he didn't stop there. Mr. Henry recreated the flavors of his travels, bringing the experiences of faraway lands to his kitchen. One week, he asked his daughter-in-law to bake a warm, buttery French croissant, and the next, he enjoyed a glass of rich, aged wine from Napa Valley. Each taste, each visual reminder, took him back to the moments that had shaped his life, not in distant lands, but in the comfort of his own home, where he could relive his adventures in a way that was deeply personal and meaningful. One day, someone asked him, "Don't you miss going to those places in person? Isn't it sad?" Mr. Henry smiled and looked out the window at the golden sunset filtering through the trees. The best part of any journey is not the distance traveled, but the memories we carry with us. And those memories, he said with a wink, we can relive them as often as we wish, in any way we choose. Have you ever thought about how you want to live as you age? Will you allow the past to become nothing more than a collection of distant memories? Or will you find ways to bring them back to life and cherish them anew each day? Aging doesn't have to mean accepting a life of confinement, following rigid schedules, and living within the sterile walls of a nursing home. These stories show that, even as the years pass, you can still hold the reins of your life. The question we all must ask ourselves is, how do you want to live as you age? Is it a life of freedom, where you decide when to wake up, when to savor your morning coffee, when to take a walk in the fresh air, and embrace each moment on your terms? Or will you allow others to dictate your daily routine, eating at set times, following predefined sleep schedules, and waiting for the rare visits from family in a place that no longer feels like home? Life doesn't have to shrink just because time moves forward. The possibility of experiencing, learning, and enjoying the things you love is still within reach, even as the years add up, if you're willing to choose a different path. After hearing these stories, which one resonated with you the most? Was it Eleanor trying TikTok for the first time? Or perhaps another character's journey that touched your heart? And where are you in all of this? Share with us which story left the deepest impression on you and made you think about how you want to shape your own future.